Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hangar DX podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about everything developer experience related. And today with us, we have Ricky joining from Walmart. And Ricky is a PM. So I'm really excited. This is the first time we're having a PM on our podcast to talk about like how it is to be a PM in a DevEx space, which generally we don't find enough PMs in. So, Ricky, please introduce yourself and then we'll get started.
Well, happy to be here, excited to join, and I'm glad to be your first PM on the podcast today. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that the opinions and views that I express today are my own and do not reflect those of Walmart Global Tech, just in case. But I'll give a quick brief of myself. I have over 12 years of product management experience. I've been with Walmart for the last 6.5 years, and predominantly I've been focused on improving developer experience since then. And yeah, I'm happy to jump into your questions.
Yeah, let's kind of like maybe just start with your background, right? How did you get into
Mhm.
DevEx? Like, why DevEx or like, what brought you here?
Yeah, so I think it would be good to kind of set the stage and give some context of what developer experience means to me. I think developer experience could mean a lot of things to different people. So I'll explain kind of the different areas of DX from where I kind of entered and how my journey began. So first, I'll kind of simplify. There are three kind of basic areas of DX. There's the platform tool side, which is really the foundation of getting developers what they need to get their applications to production. So these are your CI/CD pipelines, testing, runtime environments, databases, cloud services, etc. Then the second kind of grouping, I call them accelerators. And this is what do we need to help developers move faster through their development lifecycle. So these are like starter kits, deployable blueprints, coding assistance, agentic AI. Those kind of falls in that category. And then the third major bucket is like documentation and learning, which is how do we connect developers to the tools and the knowledge that they need to get them going. Essentially, when they have roadblocks or need support or just in discovery mode, there's that bucket. And then kind of sitting on top of that, I call it the unified platform, which is how do we stitch all of these together into a unified experience. So I kind of give you a stage of like where I see developer experience. Where I kind of fell into DX was I was brought in to solve the upper layer, the top part of how do we just start stitching all these things that exist at Walmart. So when I first started, there were a bunch of tools that were deployed by different teams, and they were just kind of scattered. So some of the feedback that we got from our developers were like, I don't know where to find the tools. I don't have one place to look. Every experience is different. And that was really what brought me in. So my background actually is not in software development. I have a mechanical engineering background, so I do have like some technical, deep technical knowledge in that space. But I've never been a coder. I did some brief software development, wasn't very good at it. Just kind of let you know where I stand as a developer itself. But where I did kind of excel at is understanding user experiences, understanding like what are things that make a great product. And that's kind of how I brought in and helped solve that problem. And you can kind of see where solving a problem of stitching different experiences and bringing assets together is not something that is needed in the technical aspect. After I solved that problem, then I focused on, all right, the documentation and learning side. How do we get developers to produce more content, produce more knowledge? How do they share all this and make it so that it's easily accessible to foster a more collaborative community within Walmart? And also I focused on the accelerator side of, okay, there's all these tools that exist. How can we build integrations and stitch up these experiences so that developers can access and use them a lot faster? And I've more or less been kind of out of the platform tools. Those are my partner team. So I work very closely with them in integrating it into the platform, but those require more deeper domain knowledge in those spaces. And more or less, I've been kind of just a partnership in that space.
Very cool. So before we dive into a lot of like these details, it might be interesting to at least give some context to our audience in the sense of like what's the scale. So like maybe you can give like rough numbers on how many developers is this DevEx team that you're sort of like part of serving, and kind of like maybe a high level of how it is structured.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually have about 25,000 monthly users in Walmart Global Tech. I think roughly around that ballpark are all developers, but we do have users that are product managers as well as program managers and other folks within the Walmart Global Tech space. So that's kind of the scale of it. To give you more scale of like the amount of usage we get on a daily basis, we have over 10,000 users daily, about 18,000 users weekly. So it's a pretty large scale in like Walmart, enterprise size.
That's amazing. It's also amazing to hear you kind of like call them as users, which is actually like an important part of being a PM, right? Like really, for you, these developers are the users. So okay, so from your perspective, like you come from a mechanical background, which is also very interesting. So how technical somebody needs to be kind of like successful as a PM, especially in DevEx space, right? I understand kind of like dev tools itself generally tends to be more technical, but like especially developer experience, so you really need to understand how developers operate day to day. So how technical a person needs to be? How deep they need to go and like go technically to be successful?
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to kind of set the stage of the different elements of developer experience. Because I think a DX PM role is just like any other PM role, right? You're still the voice of a user, as you mentioned. I call them, they are my users. You still need to build empathy. You still need to understand workflows, dig deep into the problem, and really talk to them regularly, and always serve them the best you can, right? Like, so your job is to, from having developers be our users, we're trying to remove any roadblocks to prevent them from focusing on their business problem. So I just want to kind of like leverage that. Being a DX PM and being a PM in general, you still have the same kind of foundational aspects of what it means to be a PM. Now, specifically, what are the technical, like deep, how deep do you need to be technically to be a DX PM? It really depends on which areas you dive into. So going back to like, the different elements of DX, when I was kind of brought in, because it wasn't super domain specific, you could essentially hire a generalized PM in that space. Like if someone has this technical know-how, can can work with leaders, can get buy-in and share a vision. Those are just things that skill sets that I would kind of look for. So when it came down for me hiring PMs on my team, I also kind of had that aspect of we're here really trying to build a community and change the culture of Walmart. There's no like technical domain that's needed in the problems that I'm solving. Now, that being said, if you're a PM, let's say on the testing side or on the databases side, like those do require, I would say, probably more technical knowledge and maybe even need a developer who's converted to a PM in those types of spaces. It really depends on which areas of DX you're diving into and what types of skill sets that are required for that job. And I think it's all based on the company, what they need, what culture is trying to build with the product team. And yeah, again, what area that you're kind of focused on.
Nice. And what advice would you give someone who's kind of like looking to transition in such a role?
The advice I would kind of give them is think about what is exactly the problem that company, that team needs to solve. Like, what exactly are you trying to solve? Because developer experience is not just solving a technology problem. It's solving like a culture problem. It's solving a people problem. Um, And based on what that team or company needs, if you want to dive into that space or break into the DXPM space, it's really catering your skill sets that align back to that. And in some cases, you might need to be a software developer, right? And you might want to like dig deeper into a specific domain. In other cases, you don't. Right? The initial problems that I solved for DX didn't require that.
Hmm.
Now, what I am finding recently is it definitely helps, right? It definitely helps with not only execution side, being more technically in depth with these conversations with engineering. It helps with timelines because you're able to like question, hey, what's the level of effort here? And I should kind of know exactly how long it should take. So those, it helps with being a stronger PM. But I would say it's not necessary depending on which areas you dive into.
Very cool. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. I would love to understand, like, what is it in a day to day? So maybe share a bit about like, how does a typical day for you look like being a PM in DX?
I think day to day is hard to kind of explain because every day does like change very drastically for me, right? So I'll kind of put it from a weekly lens of what it looks like as a PM on a weekly basis. So every week, I typically have engagement with my engineering team. We kind of evaluate, hey, how are we doing on our backlog? Do we need to reprioritize the work? Do we need to reestablish our goals? And always kind of like refining our backlog in that sense. I have meetings with my UX design team on not only the current things that we're working on, but also forward thinking of what's happening in the next 6 to 12 months. How do we start preparing? Some design research work in those areas. I have weekly meetings with the PMs on my team where we're just getting status updates on how their projects are executing and whether or not there's any roadblocks or pivots that we need to kind of discuss or how we are performing along with the OKRs that we have set. Reading customer feedback, talking to customers, being in meetings with them. My customers, again, are internal Walmart developers. So it makes it a lot easier for me to kind of engage. I could just give them a Slack message, or oftentimes they'll even reach out to me and kind of share with me their use cases of what they're trying to build. And we'll just jump on and take in those insights. Um, I have, okay, I say on a bi-weekly basis, I meet with like our VPs or my skip level and just kind of share with them what are the latest top of mind problems that we're thinking of. As you would imagine, most recently, a lot of them have been around AI. So that's been like the hot topics for the last few months and continue to be the hot topics. And then I also spend time writing memos and refining strategy papers and really trying to continue to get alignment with my leaders on some of these hot topics that we talk about and making sure that we have a strategy around those. And then I try to block off time. I don't block off enough time, but I block off my own like thinking time for like retrospective of, okay, how are we doing overall as a team? Our ways of working, what areas of improvement can we can we kind of look at and discuss? So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like to be a PM on a weekly basis.
Obviously, like you already mentioned how big Walmart is, and sounds like you're already kind of like talking to your customers, like your users. How do you choose who do you talk to? Like, I mean, there are like 20,000 developers, you said, right? Over 20,000. You can't speak with everyone possibly. So are there like subsets of people you're talking to? Like what cadence do you talk to them? Or like, is it like you're sort of like doing just general surveys and kind of like trying to aggregate information? Like, how do you get that feedback?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll kind of tell you in phases. So when I first started at Walmart, and like our objective was to bring in all these tools together, the types of teams that I was talking to were the platform providers, like the teams that were building actual platform tools and getting them to work for us. So to kind of segment the types of developers at Walmart, you have the developers that build these platform tools, and then you have developers that are like the consumer of these tools. So my initial focus was on these platform tools. And when I had come up with like user feedback or go talk to my customers, they were my customers that I worked with. You can think of them as partners, you can think of them as customers, users, etc. Right? But that was like my large focus for the first year or so. And I still engaged with consumers, but that was more on like the survey side, the feedback side, versus in-depth meeting with them to understand what is needed to solve that problem of integrating these tools. Now, what we do is we have specific organizations that have like a higher, I guess, visibility initiative, and we work with them more closely, right? So I can't give you too much details, but essentially there's a new initiative that's happening right in one organization, and we've been largely focused with them. We have closer feedback loops with them. We have more frequent surveys that we drive discussions, and we have deeper like in-depth meetings with them, focus groups with them. So to your point, we can't focus on every organization, so we do kind of pick and choose based off of what are like the top of mind problems that our leaders have. And in a general sense, a lot of the feedback that I do receive are just user submitted. You know, through our platform, we have a survey tool within the platform now. So every month or so, we prompt a user to give a give us their feedback. They'll submit some comment, and I mean, there's plenty of feedback that we do receive that I don't really necessarily feel I need to do outreach. I just spend a lot of time just kind of reading through those or just going through like Slack messages to get insights as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I continue to connect with our developers and collect feedback.
And what about prioritization, right? I mean, you kind of like already said, like some of the uh, top priorities also come from leadership. So, kind of like how much is coming from like, leadership versus how much is coming from developers, and how are you creating that balance?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. I think a lot of the high impact, longer term solutions that we want to solve or pain points that we want to solve require a lot of cross team dependencies. And whenever there are cross team dependencies, it just takes a lot longer to like get everyone aligned to a problem, to that problem, to get everyone aligned on the goals. Um, but we know that's like, hey, this is the biggest impact for our developers. How can we continue to kind of peck at this? And then, our business leaders come with a shiny new problem. Hey, you need to solve this, and we need this by this quarter. Oftentimes, I feel like we do fall trapped into there, and this is one of the challenges of, I would say, being in an engineering organization, is that we do also have to listen to our engineering leaders who's kind of bringing in these new initiatives that they want us to solve. So it's sometimes if I feel like, okay, what they want to solve is still valid, let's go do it. But there are times where I have to kind of push back and say like, no, I don't think this is going to deliver long-term value. I think this is more of an optical goal that we're trying to achieve here. And this is more output oriented versus like trying to achieve this outcome of, hey, our developers are telling us this is the top pain point that we need to solve. It's really hard to do. Um, but what we end up kind of doing in prioritization is we spend maybe 30% on the long-term stuff, and then we'll spend like 70% on like the kind of continued stuff. And this is one of the challenges of having a very lean team as well, is that we still have to like cater to our leaders and what they need, but we want to not lose focus of, hey, this is gonna give the highest impact. We can't solely focus on this, but let's keep on allocating time for these types of initiatives.
Interesting. And how do you define success then?
How do I define success? Um, so success really comes, I care most about user sentiment. Like that's how I kind of judge my success. Another judgment of my success is, are they actually using what we're building? Um, so sometimes we'll build a product and it just doesn't catch on. Like we thought, hypothesis was wrong, or we're not really solving the developer problem. We're solving more of like a engineering leadership problem, right? And we're just not garnering, um, we're not getting the success in terms of adoption that we expect from our developers. And that really speaks to like, are we actually solving their pain points? And I think in some cases we lose sight of, hey, is this really the pain point that our developers are talking about, or is this just another shiny new thing that we're trying to chase for our leaders? I always go back to, what are the developers telling us? Like, are they telling us that they enjoy our product? Are they telling us that we've solved the problem? And I judge the overall usage of the tool and how frequent they use that tool as success. There are other metrics that we kind of look at that are more aligned to like DORA, like change failure rate, PR cycle time, and all that. But I do always kind of lean back of like, hey, if I'm serving my developers well, they're gonna tell me, right? They're gonna give me that feedback immediately. And those are my main drivers in terms of how I kind of look at success. And then what I report back to our leaders is that, including some of the other metrics that I just mentioned.
Nice. So, kind of like maybe double clicking a little bit more on that. I mean, you definitely brought up an interesting perspective or question which comes up commonly, which is adoption of tooling, right? You can kind of like build all the fancy tools, but like, are they actually solving developer problems, and how do you kind of like get that adoption?
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of talk about this in the two phases that I had with Walmart.
Hmm.
In the first phase, when I first was building out the unified platform and solving the integration problem, um, the way I kind of worked on getting buy-in was very much like a startup within the company. I had to come up with a presentation deck. I did a roadshow. I sold this vision of, here's how we're going to help you accelerate your app development process. Here's how we're going to remove the barrier of like dealing with operational side of launching into production, managing the single sign-on, and we'll have all these benefits of search into discovery for your product, and we'll give you this content management system so you don't have to worry about creating content. um, I had to sell that, right? And that was really just getting those platform tools teams to buy into the vision. And as you would imagine, there was a lot of resistance. There's always resistance, right? And change. What I ended up doing was focusing on the teams that were bought into the vision and just kind of keep focusing, pecking on them. And the teams that did not buy in, I did try to like escalate, like, hey, I'm going to talk to your VP now. I'm like, get you guys to jump on board. that never really worked, right? Like it just people are like, no, I'm on my own timeline. These are my goals. Like why I don't need to kind of listen to you. And it was really challenging at first, but I kind of took on the approach of let's just keep getting more and more value into our platform. We're going to drive more and more users, and over time, hopefully, if we're successful in that sense, other teams will start buying in and building into our solution. So that's again, that was kind of the early phase of the developer platform that exists today. Um, Now that we've kind of established that level of maturity, and now we're more focused on the consumer side of the developer platform experience. A lot of times to get buy-in, we might do some showcasing. We'll do like send out a meeting invite and do a demo. We'll try to attend events and ask some of the executive leaders that, hey, let's let us demo some of our new products. The other benefit is because we have 10,000 developers who use our tool on a daily basis, we have that real estate that we kind of can promote some of our tools as like an ad. So that's kind of part of our go-to-market strategy. Is like, okay, what do we want to publish and communicate these things? We also have like an internal communication method so that we can send out emails and we post blogs about it to kind of garner that awareness. But what I did find the most successful, and this is kind of where I put most of my attention recently, is just continue to focus on the product. And I say that it sounds very vague, but it's like, the whole product led growth aspect. Um, I found that even with all this promotion and marketing, etc., it might get them to try the tool, but they may never come back and use it, right? Or they'll use it like seldomly. What has been the bigger value add, or sorry, the biggest impact in terms of getting buy-in is really solving the problem, making it so developers want to use the tool, making it that they actually want to come back and do it. So that's kind of like for me now, that's the way I kind of focus on it is like, all right, I don't need to necessarily keep on pushing the marketing side. Let's just keep building this. Word of mouth does happen. The community within Walmart is huge. So once things kind of catch on, you're really solving a problem and giving them that value. They're going to buy in. They're going to use it, right? So it's like just continue to focus on the problem and not so much on, hey, can they adopt our tool?
Given the size of Walmart, how does even like tools discovery work? I kind of realized that maybe even not everyone would even know about the things you're building. Like, how do they people even find out?
And that's really the big problem that we solved initially with this platform is we established a product marketplace. We in our marketplace in like the first year that we launched it, we only had maybe 8 tools total, like 8 total products that were integrated into our platform, and now we have like 100 tools that are
Wow.
integrated into the platform. And this is all because we made it so that it's self-service. We made it so that we delivered the SDKs that were needed for these teams to integrate into our platform. But in terms of the discovery side, that's the value that we provided. Like we have a search capability, and now you can use in our search, you can discover all these products that are in the marketplace. Now we have an AI chatbot that you can ask, like, hey, I want to build these things. What are tools I can use within Walmart? And it will give you the full list. It'll refer back to the sources of the content that were generated from the marketplace. So that's how we kind of solved the discovery problem. But it was a huge problem at Walmart. Like you said, imagine all of these tools being totally separate entities, being separate domains. And that's really what was the state of developer experience at Walmart before I had joined, before we kind of built out this platform.
That's amazing. So it's kind of like sounds like you kind of tried to standardize a lot of those things. Um, One of the things which also comes up very commonly in our conversations is like this whole idea of standardization versus flexibility, or rather, like
Hmm.
if you think about it, there are developers who are working on many different types of things, right? You can't just give everyone the same tool. So in some ways, like if there's a mobile developer, they may have different requirements versus a backend developer versus a front end developer. Like, how do you even think about like being able to serve all these different types of users, and also what does that mean for standardization collectively as an organization?
At Walmart scale, standardization is always kind of the utopian like state that we always try to achieve, but we know we can never get there. We can never get to full standardization. And the reason is one, we're not staffed to do it. Like our size of our team is just not able to serve, all 25,000 developers and still try to standardize all the tools that they need. Two, technology changes. Like you look at the rate of how fast AI has grown and all the different tools that are out there today. We can't necessarily limit the form of like, hey, we want to pilot these new tools and we want to go through and you're the gatekeeper and we have to try to standardize all these tools. What we end up doing is collaborating with these teams of like, hey, go and do your pilot, go do your discovery, go bring out these tools. We also want to improve our platform. Now, if these are tools that are useful for us and you've proven value, how can we bring it in? How can we make it a standard and making it a managed offering within Walmart so that we can get wider adoption and other teams can benefit from it? So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. Like we try to standardize as much as we can, but we know that that's always like a much faster moving target than we can run. And just accepting that there's so much like great teams within Walmart that also want to solve the same problems. Like let's leverage them and let them bring those new tools to our environment.
Interesting. So, is there like a process through which these developers bring the tools to you? Kind of like, do you maybe have like sort of like uh, like a request out there? So, sort of like, kind of like, okay, do you have any tools that you would want to recommend, and they can bring it back and you can evaluate them?
Yeah, so internally, there's a separate program that essentially allows teams to pilot new tools, and there's like separate budget and everything. The purpose of this program is to experiment to see if there's anything that we can try and pilot. Um, Once those pilots become successful and they deem it like, hey, we want to bring this in as enterprise license, and that's usually when they might pull in our team, and then we'll have those kind of larger discussions around how can we fit this back into our developer platform, and how do we gain exposure of it, how do we bring it into our marketplace. Those are usually when it happens, and in some cases we're evaluating the same problem space, right? And there are multiple tools to solve those problem spaces. So it will also work with these teams while they're doing this pilot in this program, to get their learnings, because we don't know what tools um, we only have enough bandwidth to choose a few select tools that we can evaluate, right? So they're kind of helping us with this evaluation process and hoping that we do solve the problem together with these tools.
Nice. Okay, so obviously, like at this point, we have to ask about AI.
Yeah.
So, given that like there's hundreds of new tools of AI every month, like how does your team or your organization think about like adoption of these tools, evaluating these tools, kind of like bringing them? Is there a strategy behind it? Kind of like, is it like just tool by tool, case by case basis? Share a little bit more about like overall perspective on that.
Yeah, I would say when we first started the AI journey, essentially like right after ChatGPT blew up, that's when we really had a large focus and formed a team around AI. Everything was still new, so we were building. Like I think many companies were. We were just trying to solve everything, and as we were building this chatbot solution, we discovered problem spaces that we needed to solve. What are the best ways to evaluate your responses? How do you build a feedback loop around the responses when they're poor, and how do you kind of correct those back at the sources? How do you best build your agents and embed the data so that I think all companies were dealing with the same problems, and we've been kind of in the cycle of that for the last year. Um, and I think we're starting to realize that, all right, we're probably biting way too much more than we can chew, because there's like, like you said, there's so many companies that are out there right now, and they're really built to solve one of these problems, like very solely one of these problems. You have companies that just solve the evaluation of responses problem, like what the evaluation framework you would use. And our team, five developers, just cannot solve all these problems in a fast enough pace and compared to what's out there. So most recently, I am seeing a shift of us actually exploring more tools and having a larger appetite around it, and kind of digging into, all right, is this something core to our business, core to our team? Is this something that we see ourselves building long term? And if it's not, then let's figure out what are the best ways to kind of accelerate this process and solve the problem without us building, so that we can, shift our focus back on Walmart core problems. And I would say this shift has happened probably pretty recently within at least myself, of of like my realization. Um, but yeah, the AI journey's been fun. It's been growing way faster than I think a lot of people expected, and I think it's gonna continue to keep growing at this rate.
Very cool. So you're saying kind of like in some ways the build versus buy now kind of like there's a lot more acceptance of buying products.
At least the appetite for it, right? I think historically it's always been let's just build it, let's just build it, and I think it was okay. But I like I said in the past, we were able to somewhat keep up with industry and how fast they were changing, whereas right now the rate of AI changes is just too fast. Like we just cannot operate the way we have been and
Right.
still keep up.
So kind of like maybe it might be a related question. If you had unlimited resources, what would you want to change about developer experience?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Um, so as I kind of mentioned, there's a lot of product that have been built in-house within Walmart, and every tool has their own kind of like nuances. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that we continue to try to solve for our Walmart developers is how can we streamline all of these tools to work together? So, and it's a big task because these are like legacy tools, been built for many years, been built by different leaders, been built in silos, right? So if I had unlimited resources to solve developer experience at Walmart specifically, it's having a team of just like diving in through every stage of the development journey and really focusing on what are the tools that they have to touch and operate, and how can we make it so that maybe leveraging AI, make it so that it works like magic. When I say like, I think AI and magic has kind of a fine line of like if it works, you don't even know it's AI. It's just working, right?
Right.
And in some ways, it becomes magical. That's what I would want to focus on is really solving these like very core legacy problems that we've had at Walmart that our developers continue to kind of stress as pain points, and try to modernize it in a way where we give them experience. And I really see the future experience of development be more AI forward, be more maybe even like chat based experiences where the developer is providing feedback to these AI agents and really kind of standing back and letting the magic happen in the background. Like that's what I want to get to with Walmart. That's kind of the vision for our experience. And that's, yeah, I would just send them off and like make magic happen.
Uh, nice. That's very cool. All right. So maybe sort of like a last question would be going back to your PM as an experience. Like obviously this is I feel like you're the first DevEx PM I'm speaking with, but maybe for organizations where they don't have PMs, like most organizations don't have PMs, right? For DevEx, is there a point where they should think about getting a PM, or kind of like if they're even considering maybe we should bring a PM? Like, do you have any advice for them?
That's a great question. I'm probably going to provide a pretty biased answer, right? I mean, an honest answer is if your team has a leader who is extremely user focused and can really think about and take in feedback well and really act on user feedback and enjoy that aspect of the job, you may not need a product manager, right? And there's probably, I mean, you're essentially looking for a unicorn, but you might be, right? You might find like a very strong technical former developer leader who can act as a product manager. And if you're starting up a company, you probably don't need one if you have that type of person. And in most cases, I would say technical founders have that kind of sense already of knowing their customer base, knowing how to take feedback. And you probably don't need it. I think when you get to a certain scale where maybe you want the developer leader to focus more on the technology side and not so much looking at like, hey, user feedback and collecting and trying to figure out the roadmap. And, you know, that's when I would say, yeah, you should probably bring in a product manager. Biasly, I think a product management function at least should be there no matter what. Whether you have a separate product manager in place, you still need a product manager function that is accomplishing all the tasks that are needed of making the product successful and really being the voice and advocate of the users. Yeah, so I do think product managers are extremely beneficial in any product that is built. I think you should hire more product managers. um, and actually, one of the random thoughts I've recently had of like, what is the future of developers? Even like, what do we see developers looking like in 10 years? And more or less, I actually think developers and product managers are going to be closer together in terms of the type of role. Like you're going to have developers become more like product managers because they may not need to focus on coding as much. They can
Right.
just leverage AI and submit a prompt with their ideas and get magic to happen and get the application and product to be built. And now they start thinking about, hey, what are product problems that we need to solve? How do we grow our users? And I think we're going to start seeing a shift in those types of roles as well.
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that future as well. So, Ricky, thank you so much. This was a pleasure talking to you. Definitely, you're going to be an inspiration for many PMs in the DevEx space we might see in the future.
I sure hope so. It was great being here. Thank you for having me, Ankit.